Thank you, and welcome to the meeting number 12 of the House Commons Standing Committee. It's 1 o'clock, and according to my clock, and we want to make certain that we're done by 3. So the Standing Committee meeting number 12 for Standing Committee of Government Operations and Estimates. Today, the committee will be continuing its study on the air defence procurement projects and its study of national shipbuilding strategy. The committee will be considering each study separately. The study of air defence procurement projects will be discussed during the first hour, and the study of national shipbuilding strategy will be discussed during the second hour. Those witnesses discussing air defence procurement projects will make an opening statement of 3 minutes maximum at the start of the first hour. After that, the rest of the hour will be taken up with the questions from the members. Those witnesses appearing as part of the national shipbuilding strategy will make an opening statement of 3 minutes maximum at the start of the second hour. After that, the rest of the hour will be taken up by questions from members. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of November 25, 2021. Members are attending in person and in the room as well as remotely by Zoom. Regarding the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to make sure and maintain the consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether participating virtually or in person. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations of the public health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, the following recommended when attending in person. Anyone with symptoms should participate by Zoom and not be attending the meeting in person. Everyone must maintain 2-meter physical distancing, whether seated or standing. Everyone must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room. It is recommended in the strongest possible terms that members wear their masks at all times, included when seated. Non-medical masks, which provide better clarity over cloth masks, are available in the room. Everyone present must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer at the room entrance. Committee rooms are cleaned before and after each meeting, so to maintain this, everyone is encouraged to clean the surfaces such as the desk, chair, microphone with the provided disinfectant wipes when vacating or taking a seat. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for your cooperation. We will continue our study on air defence procurement projects. I would like to welcome the witnesses and invite them to make their first opening statements. We'll start with Mr. Collins, then Mr. Ferguson, and then Mr. Kazurak. And I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. And we'll start with Mr. Collins, please. 3 minutes.
Thank you for the invitation to speak to you all today on the most important of topics, Canada's air defence procurement projects. The 2016 report of the Standing Committee on National Defence on Canada's air readiness noted that, quote, the international security environment is both unpredictable and in constant evolution. I think the events of the past 8 months, to say nothing of the previous 5 weeks, have reiterated just how true this statement is, all of which have implications for Canada's air defence and wider defence policy. Rapid changes among friend and foe alike, like Russia's invasion of Ukraine, call for a clear-eyed assessment of Canada's own role in the world and what investments we collectively need to make to effectively defend our sovereignty at home, uphold our alliances on the continent and overseas. This duty falls on the shoulders of government, parliamentarians, and citizens alike. However, the approach adopted in equipping the Canadian Armed Forces over the last several decades is no longer satisfactory. To be sure, in the air realm, both current and past governments have replenished fleets of aircraft, like the C-130J Hercules, or acquired new capabilities, like the C-17 Strategic Lift. Progress has also come in supplying new fixed-wing search and rescue aircraft, like C-295s, and modernizing the CP-140 Aurora patrol planes. These are both welcome initiatives, as is the plan to acquire new strategic tanker capability by the end of the decade. However, with these few exceptions, the procurement process for key air defense projects remains frustratingly hindered by both politicization of projects and a cumbersome status quo process split between central agencies and defense procurement bureaucracy. By D&D's own admission, it typically takes 15 years on average to deliver new equipment to the CAF, but this is an average, can often take longer. The fixed-wing search and rescue aircraft I noted earlier, for example, began as a project in 2002. The last aircraft is not expected to enter service till 2024, 22 years later. I need not remind you about the CF-18 replacement. Finally, there was NORAD modernization, a high priority item between both Canada and the US that is at the heart of our shared continental defense alliance since 1958. As so often the case, the question remains, what costs are we prepared to pay and what capabilities are we prepared to invest in? I sincerely hope discussions like the one being undertaken by this committee will help shed light on these questions and inform the government and Canadians as a whole on the next steps forward. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Collins, and now we will go to Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you very much. I've had a chance to listen to some of the testimony of the committee on this issue, but I'll leave my remarks to questions regarding the general issues surrounding defense procurement in this country. I want to focus on two things. One is a puzzlement in my mind, and this relates to the F-15 decision, if it's a decision. So on one hand, the government seems to say, we're going to buy the F-35, pardon me, but somehow the Saab Gripen is still sort of on the hook. And what I fear is that we're going to have a repeat. And one of the interesting things about procurement in Canada, defense procurement, is these things keep repeating themselves and we don't learn any lessons. And what I mean by this is if you go back to the late 1970s and the decision to acquire the CF-18, that was delayed because of an attempt to play off General Dynamics and the F-16 with this F-18 by Martin Marietta in order to improve what was then known as regional industrial benefits. Secondly, related to this puzzle to me is this degree of 7 months to a year future negotiations. I'm not sure what is going to be negotiated here. We recall we are a member of the partnership on F-35 with Lockheed Martin and many other countries. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with the consortium regarding production, sustainment, and follow-on development, which are to govern purchases and related sustainment and follow-on development, which I would add follow-on development and spares are going to be done on a cost-sharing basis. What is there to negotiate if this is already in place and it basically should be decided as an easy decision to move forward quickly? The only thing I can think of is that the government or National Defense or PSWC, PG, Public Works, whatever we call themselves now, I can never remember, is looking to negotiate perhaps a repair and overhaul maintenance capability in Canada. That may be the objective. I'm not sure how that fits into the MOU. I'm not sure how the other allies who are partners and have acquired the F-35, how they've managed this. But I would assume those would be the template for Canada dealing with this issue as well. So it remains a puzzle where exactly we're going. And we're going to delay another year after all the delays that have occurred. I think this is extremely problematic. The second thing is I wanted to comment about estimates. I went back and looked at the estimates back in 2011 and 2012 in the big debate on the F-35. The Auditor General's report, National Defense's response, the Parliamentary Budget Office. I find it really interesting and strange, and it tells us something about this estimate problem, that the amount finally agreed upon between National Defense, the Auditor General's office in 2012, was basically higher to purchase 65 aircraft than the amount the government has now announced of 19.1 billion, I believe it is, to purchase more aircraft. So this should raise big questions, I think, on the part of the committee about exactly how this estimate and how reliable the estimate process is. And finally, on air defense as a whole, I fear that the F-35 decision or the replacement, the North Warning System, is really problematic, as well as the other elements of air defense purchases, both on the future combat and surface combatant, and for the Army, is too much a reflection of silo-based interests rather than a broad strategic perspective on the requirements of North American air. And I would add, what we're really talking about here is missile defense. That you can't look at this in terms of those particular two things, but there are much more bigger things about integrating all the domains and capabilities along with networking and all the issues that come out of that. So to consider air defense procurement for North America, for the Canadian Forces, this needs to be a much bigger picture than we're currently getting. And I'll close my remarks there.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now go to Mr. Kasurek. You're on mute, sir.
Sorry.
No, no
Thank you,
worries.
Mr. Chairman. Am I good now?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation to testify before this committee. First, allow me to introduce myself. I spent the bulk of my public service career at the Office of the Auditor General, leaving in 2007 as the Senior Principal for National Security Programs. During my years at the office, I directed performance audits of a dozen capital programs at the Department of National Defense. I'm currently a fellow of Queen's University Center for International and Defense Policy and teach from time to time at the Royal Military College. Turning to the objective of the committee to understand and improve the procurement process for defense projects, I would like to direct the attention of the committee to three overarching issues: the politics of defense procurement in Canada, the nature of the choice between a fourth and fifth generation aircraft, and the capacity of the defense establishment to manage both procurement and sustainment of the aircraft after purchase. Regarding the politics of procurement, Canada has been afflicted by two basic disagreements. First, there is a lack of consensus amongst Canadians as to whether the armed forces should be warfighters or peacekeepers. And second, there is a conflict between the defense establishment's desire to maintain a multi-purpose, combat-capable force and the public's evident desire to have a Walmart-style budget defense policy. The lack of consensus and the low salience of defense in electoral decisions has resulted in the weaponization of defense procurement to appeal to one side or the other, rather than to pursue a coherent national strategy. Regarding these dynamics have disrupted the F-18 replacement project. On Monday, the government announced the selection of the F-35. From the standpoint of the aircraft's mission, this makes sense. Continental air defense is the primary mission of Canada's fighter force, and the U.S. Air Force intends to base their continental air defense on fifth generation aircraft. While a fourth generation aircraft might still be useful to NORAD, the role of a fourth generation fighter would become limited. And the war in the Ukraine suggests that survivability in contested airspace is essential. Russian air defenses are impressive and their reach extends roughly 400 kilometers into NATO airspace. NATO and other defense ministries have voted with their feet and have opted for the F-35. The main issue with the F-35 presents the armed forces is sustainment. The F-35 sustainment costs are enormous and unknown. The autonomic automated logistics system, or ALIS, is problematic and is going to be replaced. The U.S. Air Force itself is considering reducing the number of F-35s to be acquired because of the question of fleet affordability problem. The challenge of the aircraft is compounded by the general problem the Canadian Armed Forces with sustainment. The Armed Forces had difficulty in estimating support costs for new aircraft and maintaining enough support personnel to support their equipment. The department is reporting that current aerospace readiness is at about 55%, and that significant personnel shortages persist. The addition of a new fighter aircraft without adequate provision for sustainment will make a bad situation worse. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Kazurek, and I appreciate that. And to all of the witnesses here, your statements that were presented to us have been distributed amongst the committee members, so they do have them in advance. And Mr. Ferguson, if you do have one that you want to submit at some point in time, please send that to the clerk, and we'd be happy to distribute that as well. With that said, we'll now go into questions and answers. And so we start with Mr. Paul Hughes for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the committee. My first question goes to Mr. Collins. You talked about the procurement process, which is very cumbersome. In Canada, it takes 50 or so years to deliver equipment to the Canadian forces. Do you have an idea of the average time that the Americans and the British take for the same type of procurement? In Canada, it takes about 15 years.
Thank you, sir. That is an excellent question. As it relates to the United States, precise numbers, I do not. Generally, I have a pretty good understanding how procurement works in, say, a fellow middle power like Australia, and it's not that much better, I'm afraid. it goes to the heart of the nature often of the type of procurement we acquire sophisticated advanced aircraft. As my colleague Mr. Kasarak noted, the more sophisticated aircraft, complicated sustainment costs, intellectual property negotiations, the list of variables at play goes on. But in terms of us having a unique situation of trying to manage complex defense procurement, I'm afraid we're not alone in that regards.
Okay. Okay.
Very well. Talking about the F-35s, I have some friends who are interested in aviation who talked about a technical issue related to the F-35s blocks, Block 3, Block 4, Block 5. And I was told that we need to really purchase Block 4, otherwise we will buy a model that needs to be upgraded and that will take a fortune. If Canada buys Block 4, we know that Finland will be receiving their Block 4 in 2029, and this could take us to 2032. Do you know if Canada is headed towards Block 4, and if so, what's the deadline for purchase?
I actually don't know the actual schedule of Block 4. That's a great question. Finland, of course, will be entering into it, but my colleague Mr. Ferguson noted about what's to be negotiated. I think one of the key things to negotiate with the company is where in the production cycle we fit. They have a certain production rate of X number of aircraft. The Americans get so many, and so many of the other partners do. So that's a question. I know my other colleagues would like to chime in.
Mr. Ferguson.
Mr. Ferguson?
It's probably going to be the Block 4, and I don't disagree with my colleague about it needs to be negotiated. The government has said that we will acquire, assuming an early decision or a 7-month decision, we'll acquire the first aircraft in 2025. So we probably know where we're going to fit into that production schedule.
Mais est-ce que c'est réaliste?
Is it realistic if Finland has already taken its decision for Block 4 and they'll be receiving it in 2029? Canada has not yet made a decision. Why will we receive it in 2025? If you don't have an answer, it's okay, but that's an important question to clear our minds. Mr. Ferguson, let me come back to what you said about the announcement that was made, the time limit we have for negotiations, the famous negotiations that will take about 7 months to finalize the purchase or not of the F-35. Do you think that last Monday, during the announcement by the Minister of Procurement and Defense, do you think that was a purely political announcement to say that we're moving towards the F-35 and it was going to take time? Because once again, we don't seem to be moving forward. Is that your perception?
All these announcements are political one way or another. You can't remove politics from this. I think given that the government is late, they were supposed to announce this in November, and now we're several months after that. It probably simply was a question of timing. And I don't think it would hurt that the timing also relates to, as Mr. Kasarik said, relates to the events that are going on in the Russo-Ukrainian war and with NATO. It became a much more politically hot topic. And I think the government, in terms of the prime minister and the ministers meeting with NATO officials, that this was a central issue for the officials, not the decision, but that Canada needed to do something and we committed to do something. So I think that's where you get the timing of all this. And quickly about Finland, I don't know if the Finland's decision is about waiting for the Block 4 or the Finland decision is about their projected spending on the acquisition, because it could be simply the latter. This is when we are ready to buy it.
Okay.
And in terms of upgrade costs, the whole system is designed in these blocks that you are able to constantly upgrade. Now, I don't know in the estimates of life cycles of the F-35, regardless of 3, 4, or 5, how much that's been plugged in, but that should be part of those long-term estimates.
Merci.
Thank you. Last question. I'm left about 30 or 40 seconds left. That question goes to Mr. Karusak. You talked about the United States reducing the number of F-35s. In the past, the Conservatives said they were going to buy 65. The Liberal government talked about 88. I don't know why the Liberals wanted more than the conservative estimate at the time. Do you think that Canada should come back to 65 and maybe buy other models of planes for different types of tasks? Is that an idea that we could put forward? Mr. Kazurak.
I think that with the with the strain that introducing a second aircraft into the system would put on both training and maintenance, that it's something that you really want to avoid. I mean, even at 88 aircraft, we are operating a very, very small fleet of aircraft. And to throw another sophisticated aircraft into the mix would not make sense from either a personnel management or a financial point of view.
Mr. Kazurak, we'll now go to Mr. Kazmierczuk for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Professor Collins. In a paper that was recently published just in March that you co-wrote, titled "If Only Warships Grew on Trees, the Complexities of Off-the-Shelf Defense Procurement." Bonus points, by the way, for creativity for the title of that report. But in that report, you state, quote, "As tempting as it is to believe that there is a straightforward solution to Canada's perennial defense procurement woes, caution on an off-the-shelf based model is warranted." Can you speak about why the caution for off-the-shelf procurement solutions?
Happy to, and I appreciate the props for my madman style rhetoric. Sure. So there are a couple of variables at play, as noted in that paper. One, off the shelf can be buying directly from someone, an existing production line, or buying an existing design and then adapting to your needs. The risk there is one. Companies and countries that manufacture goods primarily do for their own specifications. So a German submarine is primarily built for the realities operating in the Baltics. So it tends to be smaller, shallower waters, not as long distance, for example. So taking that design, even though it's, quote, off the shelf, would require modifications on the Canadian end to meet Canadian needs. Why would you buy a submarine that is limited capability-wise for your own Navy, especially a country with the world's longest coastline and 3 different oceans? And the second thing is that design changes are inherently complex, not simply just in intellectual property negotiations and the costs that go with that. Is that a design for an existing piece of equipment in production is a design that's probably several years old. So you look at the Berlin auxiliary oil replenishment ship, which is at the heart of the new joint support ships being built in Seaspan out in Vancouver. That design traces back to the 90s. And we bought it. It was roughly about a decade old, and then we had to modify it to our needs. And then we had to modify the design because it's a modular build to work within the confines of the Seaspan yard, because the yard that built that ship in Germany was a much bigger yard in Hamburg. So all these layers of complexity go into simply saying that we should always think about off the shelf, but the idea that it will be, quote, quick or somehow cheaper, I would definitely advise caution on that. These are much more complex, especially if you're talking about building domestically in Canada.
And there's been some examples in the past where we've sort of learned that lesson the hard way. I'm thinking about the 15 Chinook helicopter deal under the previous government. Can you maybe speak a little bit about that and what's the lesson that was drawn from that particular example?
For sure. So the Auditor General actually looked at this. My colleague may want to comment at some point, but the Chinooks, we looked for 15 helicopters. We want them to do not simply just picking up troops and bring them to another spot, but essentially be able to operate in the Canadian environment. So not only just different weather challenges, operate over long distance. So the design had to be modified to actually include larger fuel tanks to enable that. We also want the Chinooks to do simply more than just what one armed service expects. So the Special Operations Command wanted to be able to use the aircraft as well. Larger allies like America will build and buy multiple variants of this particular helicopter. But for us, we buy technically small fleets relatively, and we try to jam as much as we can in them. Sometimes that's wish list thinking. Sometimes those is operational realities. You want a helicopter that can actually do multiple things. But the challenge is you are changing the design. So that involved IP negotiations, incorporating the new designs into a helicopter that's been around since the 60s, and then ensuring that it comes off the production line.
So again, to use a phrase, it's not like walking into Walmart and being able to take a fighter jet or a warship off the shelf. There's got to be some serious thought and consideration here to make sure that that we're matching the ships, the vessels to what the mission is, what we're trying to accomplish here in Canada, and what are some of the parameters and the frameworks that we operate in. So I really appreciate you making that clear for those that are watching at home and for this committee as well too. Capabilities change of vessels and jet fighters and whatnot. And we heard from a recent witness to our committee that the F-35s that we are in the process of procuring are vastly superior to the ones that were available 7 years ago. So the F-35 has evolved. Would you agree with that statement? And do you have any insight to how they may have improved, and what would that mean for their capability?
That question to me, sir?
Yes, to yourself, or
Sure.
really to any of the other members.
I can take a first crack at it. So a large production plan like this, you're talking several thousand aircraft, you tend to build in what's known as blocks, as has been indicated as by our colleagues earlier. And the idea is that through each block, you're learning as you go about, what are particularly mechanical challenges, particularly in the F-35, as my colleague, Mr. Perry noted, it's like a flying computer. What are the software challenges? So every time more of these machines enter operation, you are learning about how to fix them, manufacture them. Is there anything on the production lines? So it's just a normal build cycle. We see this with ships, by the way, too. They often can be built in blocks. With this particular, block 4, this is where I would love to see someone from the, the Joint Strike Fighter Office or Lockheed Martin come in to explain more, because I personally, as someone who researches, have a hard time ascertaining specific technical differences about what's going on. One of that, it's a particular better engine, perhaps, better software upgrades, notifying the glitches with earlier variants. So that would be my initial answer to it.
Collins, and unfortunately due to time, Mr. Kazurak and Mr. Ferguson, if you do have an answer to that question, if you could put that in writing and submit that to the clerk, we would distribute that. I appreciate that, but I apologize just because of time constraints. We'll now go to Mrs. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais,
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. Your expertise is precious. Mr. Collins, concerning the Joint Strike Fighter program, the federal government is financing the design and construction with some other countries. There's also a memorandum of agreement signed in 2006 allowing Canadian companies to bid for the F-35s, but there was no industrial compensation. This is my question. What is the impact of this memorandum, not only on the Canadian economy, but also on the development of industrial know-how and technology in Quebec and Canada?
Thank you, ma'am, for that question. Your question really gets to the heart of the Joint Strike Fighter, and the emphasis is on joint. The partnership of original 8 countries, the idea was that by funding annually the payment of the research and development of this aircraft, is that your companies in your country will be able to benefit from the global supply chain and bid on them. My understanding from D&D estimates that about $2 billion US has already been obtained in contracts by Canadian firms. The flip side is that, you end up having to buy the aircraft, which was always going to be the challenge of having a quote unquote open competition to replace the CF-18, giving the terms of the agreement and the payments we've been making into the Joint Strike Fighter program. The other loss, of course, for lack of a better terminology, is the fact that, it's very hard, if almost nigh impossible, for Lockheed Martin to, in this particular case, get points and offsets. Of course, they couldn't because the terms of the agreement, by funding the agreement every year, that Canada would, Canadian companies could participate in the manufacture of this aircraft, and therefore once more and more countries buy into it, the idea is that Canadian companies will be able to bid on the larger dollar figure supply chain contracts over time. So that's one of the challenges, but the benefits, depending on your perspective, of being part of the partnership supply chain.
Merci.
Thank you. In summary, should I take it that the partnership at the level of technological and industrial know-how mainly benefits Lockheed Martin and less so for the partner countries? Yes or no?
That's a tough question to answer. These type of projects always have a prime contractor, but the supply chains are very sophisticated, complicated. Whether it's a ship, submarine, jet, armored vehicle, there's so much software and advanced technology going into it that it's literally like a multi-nation supply chain. It's a type of question, ma'am, that really would deserve further study, and I think it's right to ask it. And Canadians as a whole should be aware about how their companies can potentially benefit in terms of keeping dollars in house. I don't know if my colleagues have anything to say.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to comment on that if I could. It's difficult to quantify what Canada is actually receiving, although it's probably clearer than the alternative. And it should be kept in mind that industrial benefits, whatever they're called today, were very difficult to track. You couldn't tell whether it was going to be money that would have been spent anyway. A lot of it was couldn't really be adequately costed. So no matter which system you use, the number you're going to end up with is going to be fairly soft. This approach at least means that Canadian firms have to be actually competitive and commercially viable to get contracts. So we know we're supporting the right people. So I think that the alternative has to be kept in mind, as well as whether this approach is actually working.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'll stay with you, Mr. Kazurak. The National Defense Department provided for $164 million for some fixed asset projects by 2026, 2027, according to the secured and protection policy. Now, seeing the explosion of cost, particularly with the shipbuilding strategy, and considering the air defense needs and the plan to renew the submarine fleet, so it's really a general issue. There's more inflation when it comes to defense construction, training needs to deal with the shortage of staff, and then the follow-up and control of expenses. Considering all that, the $164 billion required for the purchase, is this sufficient, insufficient, or exaggerated? $164 billion, correction.
I doubt that it's exaggerated. I fear that it won't be sufficient, and until we actually see a contract, we won't really know for sure. The problem with all these projects, is the F-35 in particular, is that the sustainment cost, the cost of operating the aircraft and keeping it flying, has been escalating and causing a problem even to the United States. So how much we will pay in the end is a good question, and I think a major problem for the government.
Thank you, Mrs. Vignola. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you all for your really important testimony. Mr. Collins, you were asked earlier, I believe by Mr. Paul Hoos, about which countries had done a good job on procurement. I know level 3 partners like Australia, you cited it's similar, sadly, to Canada, but can you speak about maybe one that's done better, maybe Denmark, Norway, or Turkey, who are also level 3 partners?
It's a great question, sir. I think it's about defining what you mean by better. And often when I think about, who's doing well in procurement, in quotes, it's really about project by project. The one things I give the Danes and Finns credit for is their ability to make a decision. Their ability that they had the Swiss as well, So that, this idea that we take the better part of 15, 16 years to actually get a decision, kudos those countries for actually having a much more condensed relatively to ours process of just a few years. So, and that's really about political prioritization. You can kind of look into actually how the defense procurement process is structured. So in that case, I think your question points to, where are there examples of specific projects done right of equally type of complexity? And in those particular examples is that those particular countries had a much more tighter timeline and making a decision on when to buy aircraft.
Okay, well, that leads me to my next question then, around the 2019 mandate letters, where the ministers of national defense, public services and procurement, and fisheries and oceans, all of their mandate letters instructed them to propose options for the creation of a single defense procurement entity. Although that was left out in the 2021 mandate letters. Can you talk about why it's important that a single entity be accountable for defense procurement and how that ties into my previous question?
It's one of the issues that comes up a lot about, we're talking about restructuring the machinery of government to respond to procurement, and restructuring, during the middle of handling major procurement projects can be challenging, but it is telling that the last time, several times this country has rapid buildups of military acquisitions, it has gone with a separate defense acquisition agency. The Department of Defense Production was the last part department that got phased out in '69. In that particular example, yes, you have a deputy minister and a minister who are visibly accountable both in the House of Commons and with Canadians writ large. But there is a challenge there that there are also still cabinet confidences. There are still competing government mandates for whether it's offsets, whether it's delivering specific capabilities, meeting alliance pressures. Those are all still there, no matter how you change the machinery of government. But from a perspective of a government accountability, for sure, I completely agree. Having an identifiable minister and deputy is important. And here, by the way, other allies have done this. Australia, for example, has a minister of defense procurement, and there is a separate agency there as well.
Thank you. Mr. Sterk, I'm going to let you chime in as well. You talked about the problematic issues around the politics of ensuring that, we number one, the goal needs to be to make sure that the men and women in the military get the best equipment they need in a timely fashion. Can you speak a bit about some of the obstacles here? And again, maybe you can cite some other countries where they've had a better process.
Well, I think the first problem is that there really is a lack of consensus as to what we want the Canadian forces to be and what being well equipped really means. Do we want to have an army that is domestically postured and be able to do constabulary duties, or do we want the complete warfighting capability? And people will, the electorate will say, well, yes, the Canadian forces should be well equipped, but then when it comes time to pay for it, when they see the bill, they say, oh, sorry, I'm not interested in paying that. And so politicians then have to try to steer the ship down the middle. And we have not been doing a very good job. I mean, overarching, we do not have a very well structured strategy for the armed forces as a whole. We go in multiple directions with it, and hoping to satisfy everything, and we generally fail. We don't do a very good job. Now, Are there other countries that do better? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure I would hold up Australia as really a great example.
I don't think we were. Yeah.
Although at a strategic level, they've in the last few years started to get their act together. I think certainly better than us.
Okay.
But yeah, I think all democratic countries struggle with the guns and the butter question.
Given the war in Ukraine, can you and the situation certainly with NATO and our obligations and NORAD, what is that exposed in terms of meeting our obligations and changing that conversation in terms of the political dynamics, and how do we meet the needs of those commitments?
Well, I think that certainly now we have a battle group in Latvia that is more or less on the front line, looking at our light equipment for the Army and for its total lack of integral air defense start to look like fairly poor choices. So we're looking and we're looking at making up equipment deficiencies that we built up after the end of the Cold War around 1990. We sort of got out of the heavy equipment and dense equipment for the services, and now we realize that if we're going to be on the front line, even in a Cold War, that we need to relook at this question.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to our second round, and we'll start with Mr. Macaulay for 5 minutes.
Great. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. Some very interesting answers. Mr. Kazurek, your comment about there's a lack of consensus of what we want to be, where we want to be. One of our earlier studies, a couple of years ago in this committee, we had a witness who said, that Canada lacks a strategic plan, and we're putting the cart before the horse with a lot of these procurements because we don't know what we want to be or who we want to be on the international stage. Have you seen in your past or current any sense of a longer-term strategic plan so that we can build a consensus of what we want to be and what we should be procuring?
Well, I mean, when you look at, for instance, strong, secure, and engaged, the words seem to say one thing, but the force structure and the money behind it seem to say another. In the Navy's side, for instance, is built around their own model in Leadmark, which is their strategy paper, and they want to be a global Navy. Well, are you going to be a global Navy with 15 frigates, even magnificent 15 frigates? And can we even afford the 15 frigates that the Navy says it would like to buy? So there are these disconnects between the words in our strategy documents and the actual substance behind them.
Do you see a solution going forward? Good Lord, things are bad enough as it is. I look at handguns, apart from a knife, probably the most simple offensive weapon we could purchase, and it's 10 years, and we're still getting sued over our procurement decision. How do you, we cannot stop everything and then develop a plan now, a strategic plan. It's too late for that, but how do you see us properly going forward so we don't have the Navy making demands for 15 very expensive, very qualified ships that may not fit into what the government wants or what our plans require?
Well, I think there are ultimately two questions there. One is who decides, and I think it's cabinet. These questions are ultimately cabinet decisions. It's up to ministers to look at the proposals coming from the defense establishment and say, yes, that's what we want, and yes, we're actually going to pay for it. What can be done in the short term? Probably not a lot. A lot of these questions, like being sued by disappointed vendors, are going to happen no matter what you do. It's part of the pain of doing business in a society that's open and has law courts.
I'm just going to interrupt you guys. I just have another question, and I just want to chat about the rest of the time on ITBs. And I know there's the issue of the F-35 that, our agreement, we cannot have ITBs, which makes it very weird or odd how we need another 7 months to come up with the decision. But the three of you could just chime in quickly. How much do you think our ITB process is delaying our procurement? And what do you think it's actually costing taxpayers and therefore our military in the end? Because are we spending 20, 30% higher on ITBs, that money should instead be plowed into defense?
Well,
And
I'll
one
take a shot at
one example I'll give is my friends, the Irving, putting in a French fry plant in Lethbridge and claiming it as a ITB toward naval technology.
Well, I would respond to this by saying there is significant delay because of ITBs. And except in the case of the F-35 consortium, which is one of the few projects on the good side that recognizes the reality of the defense marketplace. The ITP program has no sense of what is real and not real in that marketplace, particularly in the aerospace sector. You continue down the path with companies doing this. What happens? Investment gets made into Canada. Industries sort of appear. They live very short lifespans because they don't get global market access. And when the project's over, a lot of them are gone. Unless they're fortunate enough to get integrated into the American prime supply chains. What is good about the consortium is that, in fact, we get access to the marketplace. We get access to technology rather than build to print, because in order for companies to be open to be able to compete for bidding for components and subsystems on the F-35, those companies have to get access to the technology and specifications provided by Lockheed Martin. This provides greater opportunities. It then links on long-term opportunities because we are now linked into a global supply chain that goes beyond the F-35 and certainly linked into a much larger export market. This is, in my view, the wave of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now go to Mrs. Thompson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Ferguson, if I could continue with you. Could you tell us, please, why the procurement of fighter jets with modernized technology is important for the security of Canadians?
It's vital to deal with the new threat environment. I mean, the simple answer to this is old versus new. And Canada has no choice for a variety of strategic reasons, interoperability, responding as we do to American initiatives, US-led allied initiatives. It is vital to deal with the more complicated threat environment that has emerged to North America in particular, from long-range cruise missiles to hypersonic vehicles, and I'll put ballistic missiles on the sideline here. We simply will not be able to adapt, and we will not be able to be interoperable with our NORAD ally, the United States, in coordinating and providing an effective air or aerospace deterrent capability, and at the end of the day, defense capability, if we don't do this. And then we'll be marginalized.
So following with that thread for the person serving as part of the Canadian Air Force, what would you say about procuring modernized jets? What does that say about giving the persons flying those jets that advantage in terms of their own safety?
Well, I think it's extremely important. I mean, I listen to the rhetoric coming from government and bureaucratic officials about the importance of supporting our men and women in the armed forces to give them the best equipment we can give them, the most advanced equipment, to make a contribution both to North American defense, Canadian defense, and our allies' defense. It is essential that we have to do this, unless we decide we wish to cede everything to our allies, and particularly cede our own defense to the United States. And then this will have repercussions down the road in terms of recruitment. No one wants to recruit into the Royal Canadian Air Force, have ambitions to be a fighter pilot, to fly something that's old and out of date. Simple as that.
Thank you. In a recent article, you mentioned that just throwing money at defense procurement won't solve any of the current issues. We need a plan for where those funds will go. Wouldn't you say that the strong, secure, and engaged, as well as the national shipbuilding strategy, and I realize we're going to go into that in more detail in the second round, but would you say that this is good for plans of where we can invest funds to support the defense procurement?
Yes and no. Yes, the fact that they detailed these things or where we were going to invest is important, is useful. But this was done in 2017 and 2018. We're now in 2022 and the world's a little different now. The no side of the equation is that too much of it is ambiguous. And I understand the reasons why governments prefer ambiguity over specificity, because the world can change and there's other political reasons. So when you take, for example, the priority of NORAD modernization with a hint at North American defense modernization, which is even bigger, what does that mean? Well, we have ideas what it means, but usually it's a North Warning System and someone will pop up the fighter, but it's a much bigger than that. There are a lot of significant choices Canada faces in terms of dealing with or developing effective surveillance, tracking, and target discrimination capabilities for the aerospace defense of North America and Canada. These go beyond fighters. They include, besides air-to-air refueling, potentially airborne warning and control aircraft. They also include the potential role that the future surface combatant will play. They also potentially require considerations of ground-based defenses for a layered defense of North America, going back into some ways to the 1950s and 60s. None of this is all open. We don't know what they're planning. You do need a plan. The other interesting thing about this, and this reflects the strategic issue for Canada, is those plans are being drawn up, but they're being drawn up by NORAD. NORAD is the driver behind this, not national defense in this country, nor necessarily DOD in the United States. It's a NORAD thing now, which fills into US NORTHCOM as well.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, do I have time for one more question?
30 seconds.
I'll leave it for someone else to continue rather than interrupt the answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. My question goes to Mr. Kazurak. The American publication, American Defense News, published an article in July 2021 that the F-35s still had 7 critical deficiencies that needed to be corrected. The constructor denies telling us what those technical deficiencies are. We know that the F-35 of today is different from the one in 7 years ago. That is clear, but 7 critical faults, that's disturbing. Could you tell us what you know about those 7 deficiencies? What are the risks at play? Do you think that those dangers have been properly evaluated?
Well, the aircraft has hovered around 7 or 8 critical deficiencies, but they were always changing. They correct some and new ones get added. And of course, they don't want to reveal what those are because it's related to the combat effectiveness of the aircraft. I mean, the problem with the F-35 is that it's still in low initial rate production, and they've built several hundred aircraft. U.S. has acquired almost 25% of its target fleet, and the plane is still not completely finished yet. So I think that the consequence is that once you are in this world, you bring money, because this is the nature of the beast. It's never really going to be fixed, but you can't afford not to go there. You can't afford to go back to 4th generation aircraft that are more predictable because they aren't survivable anymore. So it's a dilemma, but you just bring money.
Do you think that the government, in its calculation of the budget for maintenance and so on, has included that risk factor that you have just mentioned, the fact that it's a new aircraft? When corrections are made, there will be other problems. Considering its budget, long-term budget projections, has the government taken into account all that, those corrections, and also putting aside some money because there's going to be an end of life cycle? So is there foreseeability, in your opinion, tied to the amounts that have been revealed so far?
We don't know. We haven't seen it. We haven't seen the contract yet, so we have really no idea about what the projections are. But I would hazard a guess that whatever the projections are, they're going to be too low in the end.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to Mr. Kucerek. Mr. Kucerek, in terms of the politics, again, you raised this as a major problem. I mean, this is a delayed procurement process, both under conservative and liberal governments. Now, public services and procurement, an official suggested that the government's rigid procurement process provides resilience against changes of leadership. And we know there's been leadership at the bureaucratic level as well. What other benefits could Canada's highly structured procurement approach provide? And maybe in your view, do the benefits of a rigid procurement approach outweigh the disadvantages?
Well, I'm not sure that the rigidity also always provides benefits. I mean, it's a matter of degree. One thing it does provide, or is provided, is a level of transparency with all the checks and balances. One has a better sense of what is going on with the procurement. And this was the reaction to the Hillier Air wave of sole sourcing. Was we have to put something in place that is gives the public a better sense that these things are being looked at carefully. So it does provide some reassurance, but it is easy to go overboard. And I think that the case has been made by others that we've reached that point. So simplification, certainly when you look at the air projects that were done by ACANS, where the government essentially sole sourced, it's hard to say that those procurements are worse than ones that have had an extensive competitive process.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
20 seconds.
Can you maybe talk about maybe identify the other elements of department culture that actually contribute to positive procurement outcomes?
Well, I mean, on the positive side is that the public service in Canada is professional and it's politically neutral. So the public service is going to attempt to provide their ministers with what ministers have asked for. So it's a responsive public service. I think that is a great asset, because you can have changes of government and still have a knowledgeable bureaucracy in place. This is certainly a problem the Americans have, where they change their senior bureaucracy over every couple of years.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Mr. Lobb for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to everybody here. Mr. Ferguson, my first question is for you. I've asked this question a couple of times at committee, and the question is around the person carrying portable air defense systems. And Canada, from anything I've been able to find out, we have virtually zero. And we have no ability, being a Monday morning quarterback, to support Ukraine with any of those, inability to defend ourselves. And how is it that we put ourselves in this position? How is it that we did this?
Combination of several factors. First of all, the environment of the time of the decision to eliminate the limited air defense capabilities of the Canadian Army. This was still prior to the return of great power competition and rivalry that we've seen. There was no air threat to Canadian forces. If you think in context of Afghanistan, in Iraq, we're dealing with insurgents. So that easily then goes by the wayside. There's no problem right now. We don't need it, so why bother? We can rely on allies on a limited basis because we fight in a coalition. And then in the context of the competition for projects among the forces and also within the Army, air defense became down at the bottom, rapidly dropped to the bottom. With the changing environment now back to as the Russo-Ukrainian war, and of course this predates this because this comes out in 2018 and is mentioned in 2017, there's a recognition that for Canadian forces overseas, they need air defense. There's still the allied component, and the issue of what air defense is an open question right now.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess the last point I would make on this is I can find articles, and likely you've read them or wrote them, that go back pretty close to 10 years ago about this issue. And it looks to me like it's never been, well, obviously it hasn't been addressed because we don't have any, but how is it that, you'll have all the military personnel, and I'm not criticizing them, and people at D&D that would liaise with our allies, the US and others, and, they wouldn't say to them, guys, you've got nothing here. Like, you got to talk to Justin, or you got to talk to Bill Morneau or Christia and get some orders in. Like, how's that work?
It's the internal dynamics in a fiscally constrained, capital budget constrained environment. If we go back, and that's not gone away, it still exists lurking beneath the surface. When the services where this starts and it bottom up in terms of priorities, in my view, in terms of the Canadian Army, this was not going to compete against other requirements they thought much more pressing, including the return to a new generation of main battle tanks. So it's a dynamic of intra-service, and then it steps into the inter-service world before this is all put together and then delivered as a package to government.
And I can go back, and I was there in Parliament many years ago when the debate was, I can remember Michael Ignatieff. That's a long time ago. And he was talking about, you went to buy a Chevy and you come home with a Ferrari. And I wonder, at the end of the day, from 2010 till 2022, is it dollars? Because that was the argument at one time. Is it fit, form, functionality? What at the end of or was it just the fact that it was a sole source contract way back in the day? What at the end of the day, we've ended up with the same machine. What is your analysis of how we got here?
Could you clarify? I'm not sure what you mean, but the same machine. What machine?
Well, the same F-35.
Oh, the same F-35.
The same the F-35. Yeah.
I guess the simple answer is it's politics. It's political considerations. When political parties decide they think there is political benefit out of politicizing a defense issue because of a large money attached to it, and I understand that incentive, you suddenly get into this problem. We saw it before. If you go back to the 90s and that lengthy project to replace the Sea King helicopters with the AH-101, the cancellation. So the simple answer, it's political involvement. It's reflected, of course, also in terms internally, and this is the context of professionalization of the bureaucracy. Yes, they're highly professional, but they're also play the game of the second guess. What does the government want? So if the department feels that the F-35 in the process leading through the election of 2015 and afterwards, the government is not going to likely look favorably on moving forward quickly, the department won't move forward. They'll find other things to push forward. And it's the dynamic between government on one hand, perceptions and beliefs in departments on the other hand, that combine together to explain how these things drag on.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now go to Mr. Baines for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for joining us today. I want to go into the NSS program, the National Shipbuilding Strategy, and talk a little bit about the Vancouver Seaspan shipyards, very important to our marine sector. My questions are coming to you from Richmond, British Columbia. So with the ships being commissioned to build 2 joint support ships, the first is scheduled to be delivered in 2023. Can you please outline the function of these ships within the Royal Canadian Navy? And my question is for Mr. Collins.
Sure. Thank you, sir. So the JSS are simply providing not just refueling capabilities, which give the Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, the ability to operate at longer distances, a longer period of time, and therefore also helps to provide a needed allied capability. The ships are going beyond their predecessors in the ability to have essentially provide medical clinic on it, carry more cargo. It's not the ambitious ship that was initially envisioned back in 2008, which was then canceled. It has the ability to carry small limited troops, helicopters. So it's having some of the capabilities you would normally associate with an amphibious ship. But yet, at the heart of it, it's about giving the Royal Canadian Navy the ability to operate at sea for extended periods of time and for long durations overseas.
Okay, and just continuing on from there, with its capabilities, how compatible is it with our, other allies and other technologies that are available with our other allied nations?
Well, it has to be interoperable, so it has the ability to what's known as RAS, refuel at sea capability with NATO allies. Other bigger navies would splice up the capabilities we're trying to put in the JSS into a bunch of different ships. So, the Brits would have a straightforward ship that is a tide spring that can refuel. Then they would have another class of ships. They have aircraft carriers, for example, that have almost an amphibious-like capability to carry large numbers of troops, large number of cargo. Of course, Australia does as well. Of course, in Canada, we've stopped seeking the big honking ship as former Chief of Defense Staff Hillier wanted over a decade ago, and focused on this particular model.
Okay, and just sticking with you again on the fighter jets, when it comes to like the securities of Canadians, have there been any marked improvements in recent years in terms of aerospace?
You're determining the air capabilities of the Royal Canadian Air Force or the industry?
The industry itself, yeah, just broadly, are there any improvements that have been marked in your view?
That's a really hard question to say. One of Canada's niche areas, and I emphasize niche, we moved away from making aircraft and the military aircraft in large numbers since the 1960s. We stopped doing that. The Arrow ended in the 50s, and then we gave up licensing in the 1960s. What our air defense industrial base is good at from an aircraft perspective is satellites, communications, and really the companies like CAE, for example, that do the training simulation systems. We develop a really good reputation for niche capabilities like that. And to go back to an earlier question where your colleagues asked about ITBs. Well, ITBs, one of them is focused on key industrial capabilities and simulation and those particular specific aerospace niches that we're really good at is what ITBs is trying to boost up the leverage.
And just sticking to the going similar to how I asked about the compatibility and the capability. So with the fighter jets like the F-35, its weapon systems. Again, what's the compatibility and its capabilities with our NORAD or NATO allies by our NORAD and the NATO allies?
So if the vast majority of aircraft that we buy for our military are made by allied manufacturers and principally American, and we do that. As my colleague Mr. Ferguson noted, NORAD interoperability that by national command continental air defense lens shapes what goes into designing aircraft so they can help fulfill the NORAD mission.
Great, and then fulfilling these missions.
Thank you, Mr. Baines. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
5 minutes it goes by very quickly. And with that ends our first hour on the study on air defense procurement. I appreciate the witnesses. Sometimes there's a little bit of overlap on air and SS, so I do appreciate bearing with those questions. Mr. Ferguson, we thank you for your testimony today and recognize that you won't be participating in the next hour on the NSS. But you are welcome to stay logged on to the meeting, although you won't be participating. But we appreciate your testimony today. So with that said, we are now going to start the National Shipbuilding Strategy. And recognizing to Mr. Collins and Mr. Kazurak that your Your testimonies provided to us have been distributed to the members, so they are aware of it and have it in advance. But we will give up to 3 minutes if you would like to do a quick, just a 3-minute intro beforehand, and we'll start with Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to speak again. I'll just repeat the key parts of my opening statement, and hopefully that can serve as a basis for further discussion. So it's worth bearing in mind that the National Shipbuilding Strategy has no parallel within the history of Canadian defense procurement and share its ambition. The goal is to have a continuous multi-decade shipbuilding process. Right now, we're looking at over 50 large ships. There's other components for under 1,000 tons, small ships, and also refits and modernizations, a huge chunk of dollars down the road, as my colleague, Mr. Kucerek, noted. One of the challenges that's at the heart of why the NSS has had so many problems in terms of startups and delays and production challenges is that the government of Canada is essentially attempting to rebuild a capability in an industry that effectively ended in the 1990s. We're also trying to rebuild the lost institutional knowledge within the Department of National Defense, PSPC, and the Canadian Armed Forces, which were lost due to cutbacks in the 90s and 2000s. There's no factory out there or grad school producing people with large how to understand Canada's procurement system to build ships. So that has to be developed, that knowledge base internally. In ensuing years, the subsequent challenges that have emerged with the NSS primarily include project cost estimates, shipyard production gaps, protracted intellectual property negotiations, bid protests by losing bidders, and inadequate communications. Regionalism, of course, is always going to be there. We're no different in some ways than our allies like the United Kingdom or Australia, who, interestingly enough, have NSS-like shipbuilding projects. But building a 21st century Navy and Coast Guard is a complicated business, and geopolitical challenges like those echoed in earlier in the air defense side of things also apply equally to Canada's maritime interests. One of the key gaps that I hope we get a firm in going forward is what's the future of the submarine force? It's due to be replaced next decade, and I'm hoping we get some answers, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Collins, and now we'll go to Mr. Kucerek.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rather than read my statement, which Mr. Collins has preempted the summary of where we are so excellently, I'd just like to point to the two problems that I've pointed out in it. And one is the length of time now due to continuing delays and to the basic strategy of trying to stretch out delivery in order to have a long-going, on-standing defense industry means that we're going to start cutting steel for the CSC at a time when the patrol frigates, the newest one, will be close to 50 years old. And the time it takes to actually deliver the fleet of 15 frigates will be till 2045. I think that this is going to be a considerable problem to manage, both in terms of naval capability and just configuration control of what's being built. And then finally, there's a question of cost. There's really, right now, no really good way to estimate what these ships are going to cost. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, of course, says about $77 billion, but the former Director General of the DND program has gone on record as saying you can't really estimate the cost of building these ships until you've built at least 3 of them. So cost is up in the air. The defense program as a whole, as the Parliamentary Budget Officer has recently pointed out, is shifting capital procurement to the right in a rather severe way. I think there's going to be a huge budget crunch coming that's going to be very difficult to manage, and that there will be a capacity problem when all these projects, when DND tries to process all these projects in more or less the same time. So I think those two problems are key. The length of time it's going to take to deliver the fleet, and the mounting cost that will have to somehow be managed inside the defense program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kazurek. And now we'll go into questions, and we will start with Mr. Paul Hoos for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presence today. Mr. Kazurak, when we talk about military or naval construction, I see 4 issues: politics, the public service, the industry, and the taxpayer. Here we have a situation where each of the stakeholders has a problem. The politicians are changing their minds. Public service, we don't know what is happening. We don't know if they lack competence sometimes. And industry, which tries to often protect itself. When we look at shipbuilding, look at the AOPS contracts, the offshore patrol ships. We have major issues, and Mr. Collins mentioned them. There's a contract that appears simple, seems good, had to cost about 400 million to 2 billion. A seat was added, and so now we have 2.8 billion. Now we are hearing it's going to cost 4.3 billion for something that seemed simple. The fourth party is a taxpayer paying the cost. So I would like to know from you, Mr. Kazurak, you said we have many projects. Are we not biting off more than we can chew? Shouldn't we turn to others abroad? I understand that we want economic benefits here in Canada, but if we are not able to have our own equipment in good time, we are all the losers. What do you think about doing business with other countries abroad to be able to get what we need?
Well, I think that if you don't mind the pun, I think that ship has sailed. The government, in fact, 2 governments have decided to try to revive the Canadian shipbuilding industry as a strategic decision. And so at this point in time, there certainly would be little or no benefit, and probably a lot of disbenefits, to try to change the process that has been established. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that at this point in time, trying to shift gears would be a good idea.
Do you think that Irving or C-SPAN are able to build all that is needed given the time? Because if we look at the frigates with the technological requirements, we don't even see when those frigates will be received. Maybe the technology will be out of date already. Another problem has to do with rapidity, because the costs are enormous, but also the rapidity for shipbuilding. Should we just sit and cross our fingers?
Well, I don't think you need to sit and cross your fingers. I think that parliamentary oversight is going to be a spur to the resolution of some of these issues, but trying to make it go faster now that we've set upon this course is going to be quite difficult. I mean, the capacity of C-SPAN and Irving is what it is. We've got to live with it. We've got to work with that and build on it.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. Mr. Collins, we have the mandate letter for the Minister of Defense in 2019 asking for an organization which may be a new department, military procurement. In 2019, Trudeau's government made that request of the Minister of Defense, and then that request was removed in 2021. We thought it was a good idea to copy the Australian model and organize our military procurement in the same place and to put a minister in charge of that. What do you think about this change of idea by the government?
Thank you, sir, for that question. I'm not sure what the government's position on it, because there's been no formal declaration that somehow this idea is dead in the water. It is, to your point, notably missing from the mandate letters. COVID, I think, goes some way to explaining that. My understanding also from talking to people within the system that bureaucratic resistance is first and paramount as well. Departments don't like losing aspects of their mandates to complete reorgs, and this would definitely involve that. So the combination of those two factors, I think, is a big reason why we have not seen traction on it. And this type of reorg during an NSS build, also fighter jets, and who knows what's proposed on the April 7th budget, it will be a tall order to juggle a complete reorg while also trying to competently manage so many projects in the pipeline at the same time. I do think, though, it is a good idea to worth evaluating and pursuing. I would always thinking how we could restructure ourselves to think about procurement a bit differently, and I would welcome further analysis on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Collins. We will now go to Mr. Housefather for 6 minutes. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm not going to be as bleak as the last round of questions. I do want to point out that I do believe the public service is excellent in Canada, and I don't think that it is fair to call into question their competence. I think Canada is lucky to have an independent, very, very well-respected public service. So, Mr. Kasserek, I look at this as an opportunity. You talked about in your opening statement a challenge. A challenge was a different way that the public wanted to treat defense, because it was never viewed as a priority. It was never viewed as something they wanted to spend a lot of money on. And so governments didn't, even though there may have been, interests that thought we needed a stronger military and with better equipment. I think that the recent conflict in Ukraine, Russia's horrible war that they've started, has made the public much more ready to spend more money on defense and to recognize the challenges we face as an Arctic country that borders Russia, in a world where you had Donald Trump as president, and you can't always count on the American president rushing to our defense. And I think that Canadians are starting to see that there is a need to actually have a very professional, well-equipped armed forces. Do you not see this as an opportunity, Mr. Kasserek?
Well, I certainly see it as a need. And if you look at the history of defense spending, even during the height of the Cold War, the 80s, the late 70s and 80s, where the government, by its orientation, was towards the budget military side, pushed spending up to pretty much 2%, and it stayed there until the end of the Cold War. So I think that if the need is there, not only the public will certainly support the spending, and the politicians are usually sensitive to both the need and the fact that they're going to get public support for it. So if I was, I guess, in the defense establishment, I guess you could view it as an opportunity.
Right. And I also look at any improvements we can make in the department and in our processes opportunities. What I think is often failed to be looked at is the fact that there's trade-offs involved everywhere. We were just talking about buying foreign ships versus creating a Canadian industry that creates economic growth in Canada, and eventually is self-sustaining in the sense that once we ramp up our shipyards the way the Americans have to have consistent builds, they're going to be able to produce cheaper and better ships. And we're in the process of qualifying Davies as well as Seaspan and Irving. So there was a choice to be made. We may have been able to buy cheaper ships and got them a bit faster if we bought them abroad, but a choice was made to develop Canadian jobs, the Canadian economy, and to have a self-sustaining industry in Canada. Would you agree with that assessment, that that's a trade-off and a choice that we made, both of you?
Well, I think it's definitely a strategic choice that has been made. The question that I've got is, what happens at the end of the current production envelope? Are we going to be able to sustain what we've built? Even though we stretch everything out for a very long period of time, what's going to happen at the end? Submarine isn't part of the program.
Mr. Collins?
I completely agree with you, sir, on this idea of trade-offs, and I think missing sometimes in this discussion is what you gain by having the capacity to develop, not just build the ships, but crucially be able to maintain and sustain them over decades. That is a domestic sovereignty capability you need. If we didn't do this, to go essentially buying ships offshore again, you would have to depend on foreign builders to be responsible in the long term for doing significant modifications or upkeep, unless you're willing to make that investment comparably in Canada. We found out with the Victoria submarine class, when we bought those ships, the production line for them was shut down. We had to restart that production line from scratch, learn from scratch, and to maintain and sustain them because we didn't have that sovereign capability. I'm not saying what the right answer is. I'm saying it's part of the trade-offs that you recognize in your question, sir, and we should be fully aware of those when we make these type of decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have left?
20 seconds.
And then I'm just going to end with a small comment. It doesn't surprise me in the least that it will take a few months, perhaps up to 7 months, to negotiate a contract with Lockheed Martin. I don't think that this is so simple in terms of, even if some of the terms are already agreed, you have a vast number of things that you need to negotiate complex contracts. I've done that my whole life being a general counsel, and that doesn't surprise me at all. Thank you so much to both witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. We will now go to Mrs. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'll ask each of you to comment one after the other when I ask my questions. This week, in this committee, a witness said it was not necessarily the government taking decisions concerning the shipbuilding strategy, but rather a company from the east of Canada that was imposing its views on the government. Given the explosion of cost and the constant delays with deliveries, this is disturbing, could be explained by the situation we've been experiencing for the past 2 years, as well as the labor shortage and inflation related to shipbuilding. That being said, there's the issue of the capacities for cutting steel that have come to play now. What the witness said may be giving us another reason for the explosion in price, which doesn't appear to be in the interest of the government or of the taxpayer. As the witness said, if the shipyard is the one deciding, is it possible that their influence goes beyond the shipyard but extends to other shipyards, be it favorable or unfavorable? And what do you think about what that witness said before this week?
I heard that testimony, Mr. Chairman, and I thought it was somewhat exaggerated. I certainly think that the government made a deliberate choice to outplace the sort of role of prime contractor to industry. So it ceded a little bit of control when it did that. However, the problems that have been experienced are not really strongly related to who the prime contractor is and whether it's inside or outside. It has to do with the initial state of the shipyard, the state of our labor force, and the complexity of the weapon system we're trying to build. I'm not sure that if it had all been government employees, that it would be any cheaper or any better in the end. You have to interface with a shipyard at some point. So, and to be also, I'd like to note for the committee that the government has intervened and actually asked that, or directed that specifications be frozen and try to control costs, and that has caused another layer of problems. So the government is in control in my view, and the problems are inevitable given the magnitude and the complexity of the task.
Thanks for that question, ma'am. I echo my colleague's comments. They're spot on. Another additional challenge is simply that we are not the only country going through, amongst our allies, a massive rebuilding program for ships and submarines and other key naval capabilities. Most of our clear allies are the Brits, the Aussies, the Dutch, the Germans now. So those commodity prices, those fluctuate, whether it's steel, other parts that go into the ship, they're going to be there no matter where the ship's built. So it's really a question back to my last answer with Mr. Housefather. Is essentially what are the trade-offs you're willing to be cognizant of in making this decision?
Merci.
Thank you. What I'm hearing, I just want to make sure that I'm hearing that from the moment when the shipyard is chosen, that shipyard was not yet ready for shipbuilding and to participate in a project of such a wide scope. Did I understand you well, Mr. Krasurak?
Well, yes and no. The shipyards had to all be brought up to a standard before they started work, and that did take C-SPAN extra time. But once they're at standard, no, they should be competent to do the work.
Est-ce que
Here, the government is negotiating to add a third shipyard into the strategy. Having worked earlier to include a third shipyard, if they had worked hard to include a third shipyard, would that have helped us resolve the issues we are having with deadlines, cutting steel, and all that?
Well, it would have sped things up. The problem with the third shipyard is at the end of the program, do we have enough work to sustain 3 shipyards? And I think that was the issue that drove the government to limiting it to 2 in the beginning. And I'm not sure we know the answer yet, whether we're going to be able to sustain even 2, much less 3 at the end of the road.
Monsieur Collins?
Mr. Collins, I am wondering about the number of issues related to the strategy. Right now, for the 15 surface combatants costing about 60 to 70 billion, no delivery deadline has been determined. And to that is added the price of the 2 AOPs. We may need to send your answer in writing. The costs are unknown. We are hearing a cost of about $1.5 billion yet to be confirmed for those 2 ships by the Coast Guard. For the small vessels, the small multi-purpose vessels and the offshore vessels, we don't have the date nor the cost. Are you worried that there are so many topics on which we don't have enough information?
Excuse me for interrupting, Mr. Collins, and unfortunately, due to time constraints, and as the questioner put forward, if you could put that the answer in writing, it would be greatly appreciated. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we have to move forward. Mr. Johns, you have 6 minutes.
Thanks so much. Mr. Kasurak, we just heard the Conservatives opening the door in the conversation around building our ships in other countries for speed to get them done in a shorter time frame. Can you talk about the importance of the economic benefits and in terms of job creation and the multiplier effect, and also just the economic leakage of not building ships here at home and how important it is to develop shipbuilding capacity in our country?
Well, I think Mr. Collins has actually addressed this previously, that having a shipbuilding industry is a strategic requirement if you're going to have a Navy. So certainly we would not want to lose our shipbuilding capacity. How great the economic benefits are, I'm sorry, I'm unqualified to give you much of a guess at that.
Okay, I think that we can all assume that it's quite large and it's significant, especially in coastal communities. And I think Mr. Collins touched on the importance of it for our sovereign capacity in developing ships. And that being said, we've seen policies in the past. We saw a 25% tariff that was in place so that Canadian companies didn't build ferries abroad. And we saw a huge harm and impact on our shipbuilding sector as a result. We saw even in my home province, BC Ferries, building, ferries in Germany and Turkey and Poland. And, we've seen our capacity gutted by policies. Do you, maybe Mr. Collins, you can speak to see the importance of creating policies or reinstating policies from the past to support our shipbuilding sector and protect jobs here at home in Canada?
My answer is going to touch on Mr. Johns, your question, because it overlaps what your colleague from Quebec mentioned earlier, which is one core compartment of the NSS is small ship manufacturing. That is boats under 1,000 tons. The only information I can ever find on this is the occasional annual report and press releases. It is very hard to piece together what exactly is going on in the pipeline in terms of benefiting smaller yards and facilities which have the ability to bid on these contracts. It really is the missing piece, I think, of the NSS, which you touch on, which is all these other boats we need. Provincial governments, Newfoundland and BC, they have bought their ferries offshore, but those are provincial decisions. And this is a federal shipbuilding plan. But nevertheless, it factors into the equation. Well, if we had a more dynamic small vessel that is under 1,000 ton sector, maybe those provincial governments would be more open to looking at domestic manufacturing. It's a great question, and it's something I welcome more communications on.
Well, the 25% actually generated $118 million a year. That money could have been reinvested in Canada in creating more capacity. That's what we see as New Democrats. And so, when you remove a tariff and you remove barriers for Canadian companies to go and develop boats overseas, we see that as a really important tariff that was in place that was removed, and that opened the floodgates. So, in terms of capacity, I went to the Pacific Northwest Economic Region Conference, and they cited that there's about $3 billion in refits every year on the coast between Oregon and Alaska, including Washington and British Columbia, and they were near capacity. They needed more floating dry dock yards. The PBO identified that the cost of labor is extremely high and very competitive in the markets where they are developing large ships. And you talked about smaller shipyards, yet the federal government still doesn't have a program to develop floating dry docks. Like, I live in Port Alberni. We have the only deep sea port on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And the federal government port authority and Canadian Marine Engineering, that's employing a lot of people, including a lot of Indigenous people, can't get funding to build a floating dry dock, and the demand is there. Do you see the lack of cohesiveness in terms of interdepartmental pursuits of supporting infrastructure between Transport Canada and Public Services and Procurement Canada?
Well, I should say what goes on outside the naval realm is not really my area of expertise, but as a general rule, I think there's always room for interdepartmental coordination to avoid duplicate, ensure that we're actually leveraging the expenditure of dollars for sure.
Mr. Kasirik, do you want to comment a little bit about what I've said? Because I think it's really important to ensure that we get a full rounded perspective.
Yeah, I think that one of the points that the government needs to keep in mind is that the Naval and Coast Guard program is going to come to an end, and then we will have paid a premium for building up the yards and for doing our naval building at home. And if we don't get sustainment out of it because other policies are in conflict with sustaining the shipbuilding industry, we will have wasted a good deal of our investment.
Okay. So to that, here's a question. Here's a question I'll come back to you with then. That 25% tariff was a really good barrier. It ensured that a lot of BC ferries were built in British Columbia. When that was removed, those boats got built offshore. Do you believe that we should reinstate those policies to ensure that shipbuilding happens here at home?
Well, I don't believe I'm really qualified to say what the size of tariff is required, but I think that the government needs to look at the shipbuilding industry as a whole over the very long term, and tariffs would certainly be part of that.
Thank you, Mr. Kaczurek. And if you have anything further that you think of to respond to that answer, please, by all means, submit that to the clerk, and we will forward that to the committee members. We will now go into our second round, and we are moving along very efficiently. So we'll go to Mr. McCauley for 4 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm surprised, Mr. Johns, that you're bringing up building in BC. I wonder if he forgets the NDP decision to spend $500 million to build ferries in BC that were sold for $19 million for scrap and never really used. I think that sums up our capacity sometimes. Mr. Collins, you talked about sovereign capacity, and I just want to chat about that. We do have the NSS, and we're down perhaps a road that we can't turn back on, but if it takes us 20 years to build a ship, I'm curious how you can claim that's a security issue or a sovereign capacity when we really don't have an ability to build a ship within 10 or 15 years. And I want to get into, we talk about I'm just wondering what the opportunity costs do you think are related to the ITBs and also building here in Canada. I think the PBO's original report from about 4 or 5 years ago, it was about a 25% premium. If you think perhaps that if we should have perhaps should re-examine that, or perhaps loosen this a bit to perhaps look at abroad and return that money to taxpayers or to develop other industries within Canada. We don't build our own tanks here, and yet we don't claim that's a sovereignty issue. We don't build our own missiles here. We don't declare that a sovereignty issue. Why do we do it around ships?
Excellent question. I think it's the nature of shipbuilding itself. The dollar values are not just associated with actually building the ship, but sustaining it over decades. And that's really a key distinction. The other is that aircraft.
We could have done that the same if we had taken I think it was Fincantieri up on their offer to build here. We'd still have the ships built here and sustained here.
I would love to see the details on that pitch they made off the cuff after losing. They never had to explain it, and they never have to be held account to it. That's the beauty of losing than making a Hail Mary pass like that.
Well, either does Irving or PSBC for that matter. Let me just ask you, what do we need to do to increase our capacity? I know Mr. Housefather did his required praise of the public service, and we're not dissing the public service, but we don't have the capability, we don't have the capacity, and we don't have the specialty within PSBC Public Works to do this. And the PBO has further stated down the road when strong security engaged actually starts kicking in, we're going to have less of a capability. How do we address that in the near term and far term? Do we reach out to our allies to import help? How do we address that?
There's some echo there. All our allies are encountering this global professional skill demand. If you go
talking about the skill demand necessarily, I'm talking about the skill demand within the purchasing capability.
That's what I'm talking about. It's not just actually the manufacturing; it's the project management side. As I mentioned before, there is no school just pumping out loads of people to manage these projects. And once you shut down things after a decade and try to rebuild them, which is what we're doing, you're going to encounter these massive human resources constraints. This goes back to my earlier points, which I've said before. It's about what are the trade-offs you're willing to entertain. Let me interrupt you quickly.
One of the comments we had in an earlier study on this was the way we work. You could be in one part of Public Works buying pencils and papers, and you get transferred over to this division, and all of a sudden you're doing something else. Do we need a separate division within Public Works, a separate division with D&D to start developing this specialty capacity? Because it doesn't work the way we're going.
It's one of the key arguments behind creating a separate defense procurement agency responsible for acquisitions in defense, that you start building the human resource capacity and institutional knowledge. So to your point, sir, that you don't have someone who's simply buying photocopiers in one part of the career and now is moving over to do massive complex shipbuilding acquisitions. So it's actually one of the core arguments in favor of a separate defense procurement agency.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Mr. Johari for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for your testimony. Found it quite useful. I want to go back to Mr. Collins and specifically talk about, once again, customization. So you, in your submission in opening remarks, you've said that in both ambition and scope, the NSS has no parallel in this country's history. And you also later on talked about that building a 21st century Navy and Coast Guard is a complicated business and a geopolitical challenge. So we all agree that there has been requests put forward for the customization. And the customization, to the extent that it's been put forward, is determinant of the amount of investment that we need to make. I want to go back to the fundamental question of, do you consider this as a desire by our Air Force, by our national forces, or do you consider this as a need? And if you consider this as a need, what are the factors that's driving that need for us to be able to have to look at this type of customization?
Sure, it's a great question. We lost the ability to do a localized Canadian design of complex naval shipbuilding after the 1990s. And so one of the risks that was presented when you're doing the NSS is, do we rebuild that capability as well to try to do designs? How much time and cost does that take? Or do we partner with another state that's using a design that's in production line or will be, and therefore you, quote, take advantage of a variant that is used by another partner, which can over time potentially help streamline supply chains and learning curves about learning how to build and maintain and operate that ship. That would,
sorry to interrupt you, but specifically, what is it about Canada and Canadian needs that drives the need for those type of customization?
Oh, sorry. Okay, and I have a better appreciation of your question. Geography, for shipbuilding, longest coastline in the world, 3 oceans, alliances, the transatlantic. Increasingly now, we're looking at getting involved in Indo-Pacific, where it's partnering up with Japan, Australia, South Korea. And we're one of the few navies in the world that actually has that type of geopolitical operational demand to really have the capabilities if we so desire to move in that direction. And I think it goes back to Mr. Kozarek's point about, what is the vision of how we want to have an armed forces and what do you want them to do? Because up till now, it's been a desire to want to satisfy all those check boxes. And in doing so, then you need a design that allows you to do that, which is one of the reasons, for example, why our version of the T-26, Type 26, is that we're putting so much emphasis on anti-submarine capability, but also ability to attack targets on land and in the air.
Thank you. I only got about 50 seconds left. I want to go back to an alternative that I like to recommend, and for your consideration, I'd like to hear your feedback. You talked about the fact that changing the process of procurement management at midstream of such a large transformation, it's going to be, if not costly, it's going to be impeding further progress on the procurement side. What are your thoughts about centralizing the oversight of this project from a project management point of view in the interim as a short-term remedy to a decentralized procurement process?
Well, there already is a centralized office. There's a national shipbuilding strategy office set up to do it. I think the big challenge is getting clear, consistent political and bureaucratic alignment and direction up the top and consistently over what will be decades to ensure that's there. That's the real challenge.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johari. We'll now go to Mrs. Vignola for 2 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Collins, you answered my question partially a while ago, but I would like to ask you to send me a more comprehensive answer later on. A second question for you. What do you think is necessary to be done by the government of Canada to ensure the sustainability of shipbuilding in Canada, to ensure sovereignty over our territory? What should we do to ensure sustainability or viability beyond the national strategy? Because I have the impression that with what you're saying about the geographic space we have, it would be ridiculous not to have a strong shipbuilding industry, besides saying that Japan or England doesn't have ships. That seems ridiculous for me. What do we need to ensure sustainability or viability?
Well, sustainability is certainly a key part. When we purchase large-scale military platforms, equipment, we expect them to last for decades. That's been the trend going back since the 60s, and this is the vision that's been adopted to this particular ambitious project. We're not the only ones doing this, and that's why the ability to have a domestic capability, understand how to sustain and modify those ships for decades is so important. Our challenge is that we effectively have too many navies and two defense industrial bases, one on each coast, because you can't just simply move a ship around from one port to another. That is a tremendous project management challenge, is a tremendous extra cost, and it's about do we seriously want to have a 3-ocean navy and ideally 20 a year round a 2-ocean navy?
Rapidement.
Very quickly, you are talking about two small shipyards. The fact that we set aside the most experienced and oldest shipyard with 5 docks representing 50% of our shipbuilding, does that cause a problem?
The biggest challenge for all 3 shipyards is schedule is king. And that's a question of how much, if it's a continuous build, what else is in the pipeline to ensure the viability of those shipyards are simply there for building and not just simply about sustaining and modifying ships.
Thank you for the quick answer. And if you do feel you have more to add to that, please, by all means, submit that in writing. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. And Mr. McCauley, I do have to mention the boondoggles of the previous Liberal Conservative government in the province of BC, including the Port Mann Bridge, which was 500% over cost. Never mind hydro, the roof of BC Place, Vancouver Convention Center. I could go on all day, but I won't waste my 2 minutes. My question is around the PBO. The PBO comes in and their costs are so vastly far apart from government. Mr. Collins, do you maybe want to comment about why is the costing so out of sync?
Sir, that's a great question. It goes back to something I had in my opening remarks, which is communications and better transparency. What is the going into the costing models? We're told that the budget of 62 billion is supposed to be satisfactory going forward, but yet we're also hearing challenges about that the yard in Halifax needs some type of modifications to deal with the extra large version of ship to be built there, which wasn't envisioned over a decade ago. There's all different costing models. I would just like more transparency to understand what goes into that particular modeling.
Sir Kucerik, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's well said. I mean, the PBO has used basically a forecast based on the weight of the ship, and given the fact that we don't really know much about the ship, that it's as good an estimate as you're going to get. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, the former Director General for Naval Construction in National Defense said you'd need to build 3 or 4 ships before you could really get an accurate idea of what they're going to cost. So, I mean, it's a black box. It really is. More transparency is needed, but also continuous. We need to be informed on a more continuous basis. And that it really is what's missing.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Lobb for 4 minutes.
Thanks very much. Just to transparency, I'm glad Mr. Johns touched on that, because that's been a constant source of frustration since I've been on this committee is, and I don't blame any of the people who've appeared before the committee, but if you look at the members of parliament on the committee and people who are in the public service, such as the budgetary officer, none of us really truly have access to any of the important details that would give you any sense of whether things are going the right way or the wrong way. And I just wonder if Mr. Kucerik could touch on what it was his experiences when he was in the Auditor General's office. Were you privy to any of the information that you needed, or did you have to go to the US and try and run off some other estimates?
One of the virtues of working under the Auditor General's Act, which I now miss, is you're entitled to see every record and interview any person. So the short answer is I didn't have great difficulty, although sometimes there was a little bit of a cat and mouse game going on between my people and defense officials. But generally we could get the information that we were required. But it's a lot more than what you can get as a citizen or a member of parliament. I mean, the Senate asked for a time phase expenditure for major capital projects, and D&D just didn't give it to them. So I think there is a major issue in terms of provision of information to Parliament. But as the Office of the Auditor General, we can get whatever we wanted.
And you see, I think, and it doesn't matter, I've been in government and I've been in opposition, and it goes over both. And it probably goes back into the Martin Chrétien years and into the Mulrooney years and on and on and on, right to Wilfrid Laurier, I suppose. But I think one of the recommendations that should come out of this committee is that we need to have the ability to get, as members of parliament and as committees, this information. And I know the immediate reaction for some would be, well, that's just going to be more partisanship. But I actually think the opposite could be true, that if you have a lot of this information, it will take the partisanship out of it. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is that too hard to tell what partisans will do?
No, I think that would be a constructive move. I mean, part of the problem is that Canadian politics is the most partisan of nearly all the Westminster systems. When you look at the Australians, they have a lot more standing joint committees that tend to be much less partisan. The British committees are also more nonpartisan. So it's something that I think it would be a goal to work towards, and you can't work towards it without information. I mean, if there's information, you can start having a discussion about specifics rather than taking a political position based on what you think might be true.
Yeah, very true. Any time left?
20
Mr.
seconds.
Chair? Okay. The last
and that's for
one,
question and answer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go quick. This one is just to Mr. Collins quickly. It goes back to the air defense. Do we have enough time to train everybody up for the F-35s, pilots, mechanics, all the way through?
It will definitely be part of the timeline about reintroducing that aircraft, and we're at some point have to deal with 2 training regimens for CF-18s and F-35s. As my colleague noted, that's expensive and complex.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Kazmierczuk for 4 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to the witnesses. This has been an incredible conversation and discussion. Most of my questions actually have been answered, and so I don't want to belabor the point on some of those questions. But you know, the national defense recognizes that climate change is a threat multiplier. And I know this is kind of maybe a knuckleball sort of question here for you, but since we got you here, I wanted to maybe pose it because I think it's something that the report that we're going to be publishing should at least touch upon in some way. You know, we've seen over the last number of years, we've seen the CAF focusing a lot of resources a lot of time, a lot of energy on domestic emergency operations, and obviously that takes away as well and challenges expeditionary missions and roles and whatnot. I wanted to ask, in your opinion, how climate change is changing how we think about defense procurement, and specifically the national shipbuilding strategy, and how it should factor into that conversation. I'm not sure if you've given that a lot of thought, but I'm just wondering if you might be able to guide us a little bit in that thinking.
Is that for me or for Peter?
Open question.
Oh, okay.
Either of you, if you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, short answer for sure. So it's a two-parter. So there's aid to civil authority, which is what the CAF has been doing on national disaster response, COVID, going to nursing homes, which has a whole other side conversation. If this really is the role for the armed forces to be doing, and I know that's for another time, but on climate change for sure. You see it with the view of the Arctic. It's hard to dissociate the focus on having Arctic capabilities in general, whether it's at sea or in the air, without understanding the attention that's going on up there for maybe future down the road. It could be navigable if the insurance rates pan out, etc. But it is certainly a factor into the type of capabilities we're looking at for the marine side. And it's something we'll probably have to give serious consideration to looking at submarines as well.
And just to, since you mentioned humanitarian and disaster relief, it is one of the 6 top-level goals in Strong, Secure, and Engaged. And regrettably, the CAF have not really organized themselves to do much with it. So it does tend to interfere with what they see their main job as. So I'll just leave it at that. It is a discussion for another day.
Okay, thank you for that. And since I've got just a little bit more time here, and I know we want to finish off on time as well too, and not keep you too much longer past the 3 o'clock hour, but just Professor Collins, just going back to my original question about off-the-shelf designs, can you talk about, in terms of off-the-shelf designs for warships, and is there a role for off-the-shelf for warships, for example, or the NSS?
Well, I mean, we're dealing with, the Berlin class is a German design. It's at the heart of the joint support ships being built in Vancouver. The Canadian Surface Combatant is based on a still being modified version of the Type 26 that originates in the UK. So that was a conscious decision over a decade ago to move down that route and to not have a localized Canadian-made design. And it's one of those great what ifs. If had we done that, it would have been easier to think long term about how the yard should be built to meet the Canadian design, as opposed to building a yard and then getting a design and modifying it. These are complicated questions. I will say at the end of the day, countries that have domestic industrial capabilities and are building ships are building primarily for themselves. So if you want to say get an advantage of an Italian or French-made ship, you will pay a premium to get in line to build that, and you will have to modify that design. The frame design is not heavily focused on anti-submarine warfare. That is a goal that we have historically done in this country for decades. So what's the trade-offs? And that's what it comes back to.
Thank you very much. And with that, we've come to the end of our questioning. And so I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony today. So Mr. Collins and Mr. Kazurek, thank you very much for being with us. I'd also like to thank the interpreters for your interpretation today, as well as the technicians and all the staff that are here, and the analysts and clerks. And with that said, I declare the meeting adjourned.